Hello, and welcome to the Real Biz Life Chronicles, where we discuss all things business, branding, and life. I'm your host, Tracy Fryer. Now, our guest today is a bit of a celebrity. He has appeared on Channel 9, Channel 10, the ABC, and 6PR. He is Zaun Bhana from Leap Consulting. Zaun, welcome.
Welcome, Tracy. Great to be on the show with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for making time for us.
That's okay. It's exciting to be able to share some stories together, have kind of a virtual coffee chat, and see where things take us.
Yes, definitely. Zaun, I'd love to kick off. How is it that you find yourself in business? Perhaps you could give us the short and sweet.
It started in my family. So my father was an electrician. So he was probably a good example that I grew up with of, I would say, the pros and cons of business. I think
Yes.
there's two sides to business, the coin of business. It's a head and tail. But he was kind of the example that I saw. So that was what we grew up with. My mum was a teacher. So he was the one that I kind of went, oh, okay, if he could do it, I could do it. But also it was probably something that I thought I like what it creates and what it enables you to do. So that was my kind of, I suppose, North Star of like,
Yeah.
okay, when I wanted to get into business.
And you say the pros and cons. Did you want to elaborate a bit more on that for us of business?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think when you're starting out in business, you probably a lot of times have stars in your eyes. You just think, oh, like this is going to be easy. It's, not going to be that hard. Or maybe sometimes you fall into it or you get pushed into it or you just, suddenly find yourself in business. I think there's people that do it deliberately and are very organized and planned and strategic. And then there are some of us like me who just kind of fall forward and then you end up in business. And so I think, in terms of the pros, definitely business creates a lifelong learning experiment.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
a set of Lego blocks that you can pull apart, rebuild, sometimes on your own, sometimes with external factors.
Yes.
So they're not always your own Lego bricks, but it also allows you the opportunity to walk alongside others, to journey with others, to help others, to serve others. And I think you do you do get a lot of fulfillment and energy, I think, from
Mm.
being in business if it's aligned to where you're going, what you want to do. I think the cons, definitely the time that you stick into business can become a mix of, it's a passion, it's a learning, it's a curiosity, it's a kind of, I would say, a zeal that you wake up with of a problem that
Mm.
is never solved every day. And so it's constantly a journey that you're walking along and trying to figure out. And everyone's on a different one. And so that con means that sometimes you confuse your life with your business or your identity with your business. I
So
think
true.
there's all the other things around, family pressure, time pressure, external. I think it is absolutely, as I said before, there's heads and tails in business,
Mm.
but I wouldn't have it any other way. I think it's something that now that I've done it, I would probably make the very worst employee. So yeah, I would be unemployable, I think, in many situations.
You and me both, because I try and take over and run the show. So, Zan, tell us what makes you get up in the morning, especially on those days where, we all have those days where we don't want to get up.
I'm a pretty curious person and I like to solve people problems.
Mm.
And I mean, I know it's unusual that when you're in business, I'm very fortunate. My business partner, Lee, is an incredible technologist, an incredible systems thinker. And he has just an amazing way of visualizing systems and problems in his head and can see technology even without reading a manual or a video. And it's
Wow.
almost intuitive for him. Whereas I'm probably on the other side of that, and we are very much yin and yang, I see people in the same way to go, hey, how can I help this person? How can I help them grow? How can I help them get where they want to be? And the combination of that in the early years continued in a way that nowadays most of the challenges are around people. They're
Mm.
around customers. And I mean, people do business with people, not buildings.
Yes.
So as much as we have a screen or an interface in our business, which is obviously, IT services, which is a professional service, you're dealing with people each and every day. And
Mm.
it is up to us to be able to work out how we can serve them best. That is not always saying yes. Sometimes it is saying no. Sometimes it is
Mm.
challenging. Sometimes it is bringing a different perspective. But I think that constantly gives me energy, even when it's cold and dark and raining. It's like, hey, what can we move forward today? And it's just,
Yeah.
1% better every day. I know there's been people that have shared that in the past, and that's kind of something that I wake up with is what can I just wake up with today and just be one level further in front than I was yesterday?
Mm.
Because, you're often the number one person you're competing against is just yourself.
So true. And you mentioned earlier a lifelong journey. Would you be happy to share what's been maybe one or two of your biggest lessons along the way? Because how long have you how long have you had Leap for?
Yeah, so Lee and I have been together in business for 20 years. So
Wow,
it's a very long journey
that's
in business.
amazing.
Yeah, it's a very long journey in business. And I would say we had a different business partner when we started, Anthony, and and then Lee joined a year later, and then
Mm.
kind of Anthony moved down south and relocated, and it was just Lee and I. So actually, that relationship that Lee and I had was not like we weren't friends, we didn't work together, we didn't grow up together. We were almost strangers in business.
Wow.
And so I was very blessed that Lee chose when Anthony decided to move down south, Lee chose to stay in business with me. But it did begin a bit of a kind of learning and understanding of each other. And I
Mm.
suppose one of the first and primary lessons I would have in business in general is, especially as it relates to partnerships or family business or those who are in business with others, is understand like what are the things that you agree on. I spoke before about like a North Star. It's like
Mm.
I think in business there's so many areas where you can disagree or find a difference of opinion, different advice. And we found, and we were very fortunate to have an external advisor at the time, a gentleman by the name of Aksabar.
Mm.
And he was our coach at the time. And Ak did a bunch of work with us on what do you both agree on is the end goal. It's like it was kind of aligned to that Stephen Covey began with the end in mind.
Mm.
And like that was a very long picture in the future, but it was something that centered Lee and I and brought us both back to where we kind of ended up. And it's been a long trajectory. Nothing has happened according to the time frame we set out.
Mm.
Never does in business.
No, it
Sometimes
doesn't.
that's the
I
tail.
find the
Uh,
same. Yeah.
yeah, so that key point is when you're in business, like what is your North Star together? I mean, some people talk about it as an exit or a sale. Others talk about it as what do you want the business to mean? But really, what are you aiming for? Like what can you both put on paper and say, here's what we agree to end up as that we're
Mm.
shooting for. And so, you can have the analogy I've heard briefly for that is you can have your end kind of vision in like concrete, but your plans in quicksand
Mm. Yeah.
because scenarios and situations will change and your plans will change. But your vision, that end result, that North Star, the compass, that is a major thing. And I would say, even for individuals, I would say like in business, if you're a solopreneur, you're in business for yourself, where you're your own boss, or even if you're just the sole director, like what is your finish line?
Mm.
And so it's a curious question because most people get into business wondering if they can survive, let alone finish a race.
Yeah.
But business, like anything, it needs to be measured.
Yeah.
Like our health, we measure our health. We measure, how we're doing with our family, our kids, whoever you have. And I
Mm.
think that's important to also measure your business to know, like in this race that I'm running, like where will I know that I've crossed a finish line? It may not be the ultimate finish line. It just may be one you set for the next chapter. So I
Mm.
would say that's probably a really big lesson that I learned, Tracy,
Yeah.
and that again, not my teaching, but definitely I was a student of that, and I kind of take that with me in a lot of activities that I get involved with. Is where is this going to end up, and
Mm.
what is my contribution going to mean and come? So that's number one, I would say. Second big lesson in business is that I've found is there's no one way to climb a mountain.
No.
And I'm always fond of like I love business advice, I love reading business books. I think most of us
Same.
have got more podcasts than we can actually fathom. But
Yeah.
the thing that's taught me is I've met and been very fortunate to sit alongside lots of other business owners. And many a time they've been convinced there's only one way.
Mm.
And then a new business owner will join a group or join a conversation, or you'll see a new example, and they would have done it the complete opposite. And so
Yeah.
your way of doing things or your way of operating, that's just your lens. It's your mechanism, your experience. Many people have different experiences, and they can be completely polar opposite to your way of success or your way of doing things. And so it's always being open to other pathways and other ways of climbing the mountain. Because also as well, two people can climb the mountain the same way. Conditions can be different. One person has a really bad experience. The other person, it's perfect. So
So
I've
true.
seen plenty of examples where someone says, "Oh, I tried that, it didn't work." And then the next person says, "I tried it, worked fantastically well."
Yeah.
So that's probably a second big lesson is, there's more than one way to scale a mountain. There's more than one way to achieve that next goal, next task, next part of your business.
And so, how do you guys measure? Because I think, majority of people kind of just going at 100 miles an hour. You don't really measure much, even as you mentioned, like, checking in with your family or your health. So many of us as business owners sometimes put those things on a back burner. How is it that you kind of check in with those other areas of your life?
So I wouldn't say I was anywhere near aware of that as an item to do. And then
Mm,
probably a number of years ago, a bit of a mentor, a guy from Iowa in the US who was the founder of a peer group we're involved with, he shared a concept created by an organization called the Patterson Center.
mm,
And Tom Patterson was involved with Peter Drucker, who's a management thinker. He'd done a lot of management consulting at the end of World War II, and he developed a strategic operating plan, a method of business
mm,
called StratOp. And the adjunct to that was he realized that many of the executives he was coaching on how to, strategically get their business forward and make sure they executed, were executing at work and failing at home.
mm,
And so whether that was health, faith, friends, family, fitness, it wouldn't matter. He actually identified that was a key area, and he created with a few others a plan called a life op, which was basically, now many people would know it as a life plan.
yeah.
It's popularized. You see them; they're very common. He had a set way of doing it. I was completely unfamiliar with it. I hadn't heard of it.
Mm,
I knew maybe some of the concepts from it, but yeah. So Arlen introduced me to the concept. Took my wife and I through kind of like a bit of a 2-day journey of doing a life plan together and
yeah.
identifying all of the different things that you want to do, you want to have your life to mean. And it includes looking back at where you've come from, which is really important, the
Mm,
context of your history, and then looking forward at where you're going. And I found that helped me understand. And I wouldn't say, like many business owners, I'll chase bright, shiny like the next person.
yeah.
But that kind of comes back, even basic things like a bucket list, like the things you're supposed to come back and refer to on how are you doing here with your kids? How are you doing here
Mm,
with your volunteering or contributions or things like that? So those things have been very helpful. I probably suffer the same way many from saying yes to too many things. So,
same.
which is, it's always helpful. My wife plays an important role in asking me, like, where does this take us? Where does this end up?
Okay,
And
so
that
she
life
actually
plan,
asked you that?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, great.
So that life plan helps us kind of govern where we're going, and then that's fed into financial planning. The financial planner we use has a very similar philosophy around, where do
Mm,
you want to end up? What does that look like? Envisioning that future state. So, I mean, in business, people call it a painted picture of where you want your business to end up. It's just
yeah.
taking that same lens and applying it to business.
And did you find there was anything that came up for your wife and you that kind of surprised you or really made you sort of think, what is it that I exactly want, if you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say, when you look back, you can see, and this is relative for every person, people will have a lot of lowlights in their
Yeah.
life. Like they will have a lot of scenarios where things have shaped their experience or their perspective. And
Mhm.
you probably don't always connect those scenarios to maybe the baggage you're carrying around today.
Very true.
It could be like your parents divorced, as I did in my case. You had a different childhood as others may experience. You had significant events, the death of loved ones. Any of those scenarios could have happened. So, but realizing, okay, over your story, they probably have shaped you to where you are today. And
Yeah.
for business owners, you bring that into business. So
Yes.
you actually bring that into how you manage, how you lead, how you execute, how you talk, how you think and talk to yourself. So
Yeah.
I would say that lesson on, oh, okay, that's why I might be, and it could be as well as being like, you're the only child. Like there's lots of
Mm.
areas where you like, hate being told what to do, hate
Yeah.
having people control your time or tell you something's
Mm.
not possible or you can't do that and you want to prove them wrong. But it also could explain why you're fearful of some things or reluctant to take on other items. So I found during my experience, and one of the things we did together was actually looking at like the things that my wife and I wanted for our family and for
Mm.
us were areas that we hadn't spoken about, but both thought about.
Yeah.
And so in business, you often plan and you put it on paper and you share with the team, but do you actually do that at home? And so that was a big
I
thing.
think
Like we just didn't have that. So we
yeah.
hadn't actually gone and written that down and said, hey, if we were both 60, what are the things that we wanted to do? So I'll give you a personal
Mm.
example. One of the things we always wanted to do as parents, have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, is that even if they didn't want to, even if they didn't have to, our kids would still choose to travel with us. So
Mm.
even as we got older and they got older, they would still want to be part of our family to come, hey,
Yeah.
we want to go away with you. We want to spend time
Yeah,
with you.
great. Mm.
And so it might be a small thing, but there's plenty of people like, where they think, oh, like I don't want to be anywhere with my kids. Our approach was, hey, we want them to travel with us. Now
Mm.
obviously they travel, you want them to travel on their own as well. But that was probably an
Yeah.
awareness that planning, especially for me, happened more in my head than in paper. So this was a chance for our family to get it out on paper for us to see, oh, that's what you're thinking about.
And did you find there was anything else, like, when those things sort of came up for you, was it kind of a process that you worked through, or did that kind of session clearly sort of outlay those things that needed to be worked on?
So it does talk about items called what's important now, like what are the things you need to
Mm.
focus on now. But it also spoke about, and I think where we ended up based on the different and it's a number of exercises that you walk through. But I would say if you think about like a key thing for me was I love contributing a local community. And one of the things, my mum was a teacher. And so
Yeah.
one of the areas that kind of ended up happening fortuitously, but related to the plan and what we wanted to do was being able to serve on my kids' school board. So, it's a large school, has 1,400 students, kind of 200 plus teachers, independent. So there's no other governing body except the board. And
Right.
that was aligned with where I wanted to go. I could give back to my community, could provide a different voice and experience in that area, but it also connected to what we wanted to do in terms of having a bucket of, hey, I don't have something in this space. What can I do?
Mm.
And so that was easy to say yes to. I quickly realized you also have to say no to some of those things because you can end up on too many volunteer things as business
Yes.
owner,
I'm laughing because I've
so
done that.
yeah, it's a thing, but you have to choose the items, and I had an opportunity later on from, an acquaintance that was like, hey, I've got a not-for-profit that I think you would be great serving on. But it wasn't something that was connected to what was related to our plan and what we wanted to do. And we
Yeah.
didn't, at least for me, I didn't think it was aligned to how I could assist because I also
Mm.
wasn't passionate about it. Like,
Yeah.
if you're going to be passionate as part of your serving, I think that's key. No one likes reluctant servers or people that are kind of, no, I don't really want to serve, but if I have to, I
No.
will because you turn up grumpy eventually.
Yeah, you do,
So,
and resent
yeah.
it. Mm.
Yeah, so I think I talked to my daughter about it, about like, is it 100% yes? There's an author, Derek Sivers, and he talks about, is this a hell yes? Because if it's not a hell yes, then he goes, it's a no. And
Yeah.
so making decisions where in your bones, your gut, however you make those decisions, is this a hell yes decision? Or is it
Mm.
like, because if it's not, if it's just a lukewarm yes, it should probably be a no.
Yeah, that's a good gauge because I used to say yes to everything. I've suffered from FOMO. I thought that I'm going to miss out if I don't say yes. Now I'm missing out on personal growth. But there came a stage where I was saying yes to every single thing, and I was so burnt out. I also hadn't clearly defined my own values, so that made it really hard. I didn't have a North Star to kind of, I had my upbringing values, of course, but I didn't really have anything to gauge to sort of work from. So I sort of went to burnout, then realized no is actually a very powerful word. And like you said, I think if it aligns with your bigger mission and what you're doing, it's way better to check in with yourself when you do say yes to something.
Yeah, and people
Mm.
often say yes to things without thinking about what does that mean. It's opportunity cost. What are you going to say no to next?
Yeah. Mm.
And I've also found that you want to give yourself space to say yes to the right things.
Mm.
I definitely don't operate with that principle in my mind all the time, and like sometimes that is a gentle reminder or a strong reminder or a nudge. And then there are scenarios when you have to think about, well, what is next for your plan, personally,
Mm.
professionally, in your business. I mean, you have to think about what's outside of business. One of the curious parts of that journey around planning was realizing that your business doesn't come to your funeral; people do.
Yeah.
And
So true.
like your work doesn't come to your funeral. Your work won't remember you. Your business won't remember you, but people will. And so it's
Mm.
what is the impact that you're going to have on others? And for me, mine is like, how can I help people kind of realize their potential? And I just love being able to do that because my favorite way of doing that is only through questions. It's
Mm.
it's kind of like sometimes it's stories. Like I find questions first, stories second, and that's ideally based on an experience. But I find most of us will remember a story long before a fact,
Yeah.
and having that ability just to ask questions because I've always found like if I've been stuck in a position or a way of thought, a really good question kind of pierces the veil. It opens the
Yeah.
curtain and my thinking changes. And I've witnessed that in others. And so now I try to do more of that myself because I find, you know, I think Charlie Munger talks about the easiest person to fool is yourself.
Yeah.
So that's kind of this little nugget that I think about to go, okay, what questions aren't I asking myself?
Mm. And also sometimes those stories that we tell ourselves can be quite detrimental to our growth as well. And I guess, is there any questions you could share with us that kind of prompt you to kind of question what it is that you're doing, or am I stuck in a story?
Yeah, I think one of the questions you always have to ask yourself when let's say you're in a scenario where someone has a different view than you
Mm.
is what would have to be true for you to hold the same view. So you often get people who don't have the same perspective, but to ask like what would have to be true for you to hold the same view, and that could be life experience, it could be upbringing,
Mm.
it could be business scenarios. And so actually trying to trick yourself into thinking, because you often hear people go, I would never say that, I would never do that. And go, okay,
Yeah.
let's just imagine for a moment, like what would have to be true for you to be in that same scenario or think the same or have done the same? You
Mm.
know, it's one of those mental models where people, I'm driving in a car, Tracy, and you hear people and someone in front of them like pulls in front and you're all angry and upset and you're kind of yelling at them. But
Yeah.
actually, if you were driving and you were in a rush and you weren't looking and then you suddenly pulled in and then you noticed the car was there and they beeped at you, it's the exact same scenario. And
Mm.
oftentimes, we, my and thinking about this is we're too busy, too often concerned, and it's a bit of a proverb, but we're too often
Yeah.
concerned with the speck in other people's eyes rather than the plank in our own eye, and that comes in business.
Yeah.
Like there's a great scenario in business where, yeah, sure, no one's going to do it 100% the way you are, but 80% will probably build you a significant business.
Yeah.
So if you get
So
stuck to
true.
being at 100% of, oh, they have to do it exactly like me, then that's impossible. But if they could
Mm.
just do it 80% like you, that's achievable. And that's another question is like, is 80% good enough for this task?
Mm.
And, that question obviously shapes how people think. The other question you always ask people and ask yourself is this decision reversible? Lately, I've been talking a lot in our own business and other boards and advisory roles, and you're hearing people ask that and saying they get really caught up in a decision. And then you
Yeah.
say, how long is this reversible or non-reversible? And people get really caught up in decisions that are actually reversible,
Yeah.
and
Totally. Mm.
it's like, oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? Yep, all true, but you can reverse it. And
Mm.
so those are kind of one of those things is just stopping and pausing and going, is this decision reversible? Can I back that out of it? And it actually takes a lot of the hot air out of a decision when you can do that. So I would say, those are some of the ones that I'm coming just lately. Those are the ones that I'm seeing, and probably um, the other scenario that asking people is, who else has done the thing that you're struggling with?
Yeah.
Because we will have a rudder, like a rudder in our boat, and we're trying to like get to a destination, and it's frustrating. It's going too slow, or there's too many problems. But it's like,
Or the
hey,
rudder breaks.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What? And so it's just asking, who else has done the thing you want to do, and what advice would they give you, and have you sought that out? It could be for
Yeah.
a staff member, a manager, a fellow business owner, a customer.
Mm.
One of the great scenarios with customers is they say, "Oh, this our business is unique." Yes, every business is unique, but we all
Mm.
have fundamentals. And whether it's fundamentals or first principles, many of the things we struggle with have been dealt with before.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, sure, there's some truly unique scenarios around, molecular engineering, but most of us in business don't deal with them every day. You know,
Yes. Thank
so
goodness.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So my favorite joke with our team is we're not a hospital, right? No one died. So
Mm.
that's
Yeah, that's a
sometimes
great one.
yeah, like we're not a hospital, no one died. And, I always feel sorry for people who have to do with medical because it is added pressure. But for us,
100%.
yeah,
Mm.
and for us, that's a helpful thing. So yeah, those would be a few of the
Mhm.
questions.
And so what if someone is listening and they do find themselves, saying to themselves, I have no sort of North Star. I have no idea when I check in, with my family at home. I'm so consumed by my business. It's the be all and end all, which a lot of us have been in that spot. What would be your advice to them to kind of, I guess, navigate forward, not as not just blindly actually have that North Star in place? What would be the process?
I would say, and I mean, you can look at this. There's a bunch of business model systems that have this advice in it. So I'll use the one that we're most familiar with, which is called EOS, which is the Entrepreneurial Operating System. So
So good.
EOS, yeah, EOS talks about
Mm.
having a clarity break. But if you go and look at any of the like significant business founder autobiographies, many of them talk about a clarity break or break away from work. Like Bill Gates used to go and to his cabin and read all week, but it was really just
Mm.
getting away and thinking about the business rather than being in the business. And so
Yeah.
before you start to try and navigate a path forward, I always say to people, like, have you had a break? Because you can't actually think clearly. You can't consider if you haven't stopped. And it's
No.
it's it's very hard in a moving car to like keep count of all the things around you. It's only when you stop that your vision is clear. And
Mm.
I think like that moment when you can have a break, however that comes about, is so critical, so pivotal. And oftentimes it's the point when you'll have a new realization. The
Yeah.
best scenarios are when you're completely out of your familiar territory, like you're not in an office, you're not
Mm.
in your normal environment. So that's why breaks I would recommend before people go on that journey. Like separate yourself from your business somehow, like get away and really take a moment just to like pause and reflect. And I think that's the second piece. So the first one is take a break, take
Yeah.
a pause, get away. The second thing is reflect. Like, where have you come from? As business owners, we're our worst critics. Like,
So
nothing
true.
is ever done for a business owner. We're
Mm.
always unhappy with the output. So,
Yeah.
like, taking a break and then reflecting on where you've come, what you've achieved so far, and just, being kind to yourself. But then the third thing is, okay, looking forward, going, what do you want this to mean? What do you want to achieve? And then even at a next step, one of the basic things that I find, ignoring all the great, like, oh, you could have a big house, Ferrari, business class, whatever it is. The first
Yeah.
thing is what 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 role do you have that you hate doing that if someone else did would be so grateful and thankful for? And it's kind of like, yes, we can envisage a Disneyland future, but
Mm.
let's start with a local Perth council park destination. Like, what's local to you? What's accessible? And start with something that is time based. I find business owners, our most valuable asset is our time and attention. And
Mm.
if you're doing a task that sucks your energy, sucks your time, is frustrating, like, how do you take that off? And that would be the third thing I would say is, what is that first rung on the ladder that if you just cleared that off your plate would give you a breath of fresh air, would open up your thinking. So I know it's kind of pretty low level for many businesses, but even
Yeah.
executives with teams and teams of people, you ask them and there'll be something in their calendar once a month, once a week that they dread.
Mm.
It's like,
Yeah.
right, what would it take for you to create a plan? Give it numbers, give it time. So, don't just make it a wish, like give it numbers, give it time. What would you need to generate profit, margin, revenue to create that? And then create the job description or create the task description or outsource or however that need needs to be met. That would be, my first three, like take a break, reflect, and then what is low hanging fruit that you can start to solve. Because all of us set big plans, but forget the small steps. And we really
Yeah.
should celebrate those small steps.
Definitely. Even as you're speaking, I'm thinking of things that I've just got stuck in the doing that I could probably, delegate to a team member. But again, you just get so stuck in the doing that you kind of forget to do these very important things. And again, you're like your own worst enemy, right? Because you're filling up your plate with stuff that's not really a productive use of your time. So it's great to have that reminder. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, that's okay. I find the more of that the more of it, sometimes it's just having someone to call it out or help you with it because we don't always
Mm.
know, especially if you're first. Like when you're in business and you're thinking like, what role can I take off? Every role is important. You're wearing every hat. But that
Yeah.
happens as you scale 5, 10, 15, 20, 100, whatever the staff number you're at. Every role eventually takes on new responsibilities and you end up getting new tasks you don't want to do.
Mm.
So, yeah, it is. I think it's a key thing we forget about, but a necessary part of a journey to actually get a small win because they compound.
Yeah.
Just a small win every day compounds.
And so for someone who is thinking, I cannot take a break, I do not have capacity, what would be your words of wisdom to them?
So, my question would be if you suddenly got sick and you could no longer work, what has changed?
Mm.
So, the mental model that we give ourselves is you put in a scenario in our head, like I can't stop working, I have to keep going, I can't, change what I'm doing. And
Mm.
what I've seen and experienced is it only takes like a loved one to have a health challenge or an issue or a significant life trauma, and you will drop everything, And in the same way, yourself, many people continue on as owners do, and we often think we're invincible and invulnerable.
Yeah.
And life isn't like that. We're not promised tomorrow. Like we
Mm.
can't make up for yesterday. You have today. That's it, right? So the question would be, if you were faced with like you can no longer work tomorrow, what would you do different? Like where would you
Mm.
start? And people would say, well, what do you mean? We'll say, well, you can't physically do the work. What would you do and how would you operate? And like, I'll give you a personal example. So,
Yeah,
my
please.
dad, he was an electrician, and for years, his dream was he just wanted to be able to build his business up and be able to buy a boat and then kind of fish and sail. And like that was his thing. So he loved fishing and he loved like boating in general, very outdoors and
Mm.
very handy and could operate a boat, unlike me. So he was very capable. But what happened in his business was he ended up getting a really rare condition, like a cross between Alzheimer's and motor neurons, and so he became trapped. Effectively,
Wow,
he could
yeah.
still think and talk, but he could no longer like turn turn a screwdriver. He could no longer
Mm.
like walk properly. He started to suffer imbalance, and so he had a business that was reliant on him, and he had to find a way around it. And
Yeah.
like he had subcontractors, he had a couple of employees, and what he ended up doing was kind of becoming kind of the organizer. And the interesting thing was my dad, nothing he was one of those people that wanted 100% and it was never in his favor. So
Yeah.
I learned not to do as much as what to do in business.
Mm.
But he ended up having to have a subcontractor do the majority of his work. He could quote it, he could have the relationship with customers, but he suddenly had to learn to delegate and to trust and to partner. And like those scenarios, when you're faced with, in his case, immobility,
Mm.
you can adapt. And we've seen that with most of us, but we don't think that it's possible or plausible.
Yeah,
So
true.
I witnessed that firsthand that he never did it until that moment. But when he did do it, it actually helped his business immensely. And
Interesting.
it changed the dynamic of how his business grew and kind of helped him in, work through that condition, which was terminal, but it
Mm.
allowed him, in those last few years to kind of shape what that business became and how it ended up. It never would have happened if he'd stuck to his thinking of, oh, yeah, I need to do this, I need to do that, because he didn't have time. He
Yeah.
couldn't get away. So I think that's the question: is if you could not do the work yourself, or you could not do this task yourself, or you could not do this activity yourself, literally, if you were stuck and stopped and you're in a hospital bed, what would you do? And
Yeah.
that's not unique. It's scenario planning.
Mm.
In
Yes.
business, we talk about business continuity, we talk about scenario planning, and we all know it's a great thing to do, you know.
Yeah.
But when you go to a financial planner, that's why they talk about life insurance and business insurance, because we just don't think of those. But when
No.
you're on your own, like, what would that look like? What would be the smallest necessary things that you need to implement to continue operating, even if you couldn't do the work that you're trained and know how to do?
And with your dad, Zon, would you say that boiled down to his mindset? Because I can see how something like that would just, some people might just close their business, they might just deteriorate even further. Would you say it was his mindset and determination that got him through that, and having that openness to kind of change things up?
I think in the first instance, it was definitely doggedness and tenacity. Like, he didn't want to get beaten by this, and he was going to overcome it.
Yeah.
And I think in those early periods and year, and it showed up very gradual and then sped up. So, but it was that he didn't want to be beaten by it. So it was just a new challenge. I spoke before about, it was a new set of Lego bricks. He'd been given
Yeah.
a new challenge
Mhm.
he had to solve, and it was like, okay, what do I need to do to change this? Because he was the guy that was used to working on site, high vis,
Mm.
supervising, doing the work, shutdowns, high voltage overhead power lines, electrical subcontracting. But
Everything,
when it
sure.
happened, he had to reframe, I think, and I say this looking back, I think he had to reframe that the business was all he had.
Mm.
And I think there was a lesson and a curse. The lesson was the business was all he had, and his identity was so connected to it that he couldn't let it go.
Mm.
And so it was almost like that was the only option of, I've got to solve this because this is all I have.
Yeah,
So
makes
the
sense.
curse in that was, even when he needed to stop, he didn't know when to stop. So when I spoke to you about, like, business owners need to know what's the race they're running and where is the different finishing lines, knowing when to stop the race, or knowing when someone else calls time, or your team or yourself, like, what does that mean for you, and who are you then? Once you're in business, you see everyone and talk to everyone and say, I'm a business owner, and that was all my dad had known. And so
Yeah.
when he couldn't do that anymore, it was a challenge. And I think the curse in that was, he was so too connected. He couldn't stop it when he needed to. And I remember
Mm.
he literally couldn't walk, and he was setting up his office so that he could have a wheelchair to get to his laptop, to get to his phone. And then he couldn't
Wow.
push the buttons on his phone properly, and because his extremities started freezing up with the condition that he had,
Mm.
and it ended up being, it was a very rare condition, but he probably he needed to stop earlier. And so that was a I was fortunate to be able to spend time with him and help run his
Great.
business remotely from here, which,
Yeah.
again, not in my experience. But running that taught me, okay, I don't know anything about electrical contracting. There's some fundamentals you can apply. And
Mm.
they helped me kind of set him up, get him cared for and looked after, but then work with that subcontractor on a business transition and acquisition, who, again, was very fortunate that dad did adapt when he did.
Mm.
So yeah, I would say knowing when to stop is important, but then also, I think his tenacity of saying, well, I've got through other challenges before.
Yeah.
That's probably something else, is just when I talk about reflecting, my business partner and I, Lee, we have this saying, like, we've got through, after 20 years, every other challenge we've got through. And
Yeah.
it doesn't always turn out the way we want, or expect. And we make and have made plenty of mistakes and continue to make plenty of mistakes. But our continuing foundation is, well, we've got through it in the past. Why wouldn't we get through it now?
Yes.
And, I think that's many business owners have that doggedness.
Mm.
And it's something that you hold on to. I just think the extension of that is knowing when to call time and knowing when you've crossed that line. Whatever that line
Mm.
is for you in business, in personal, finances, family, that's important as well.
And so you touched on something really important. As business owners, our identity, like our personal identity and our business owner identity, become very intertwined. Do you believe that they can kind of be separate, or do you think they'll always kind of be meshed?
Well, yeah, I think there's a good example, and I'll pick on people at the moment in the US. You'll hear people say, "Oh, I'm an entrepreneur." You kind
Yes,
of rarely hear that in
often.
Australia. Yeah, you
Yeah.
kind of rarely hear that in Australia. You'll hear people us like spoken about as an entrepreneur, or but if you meet people that run multiple businesses, they don't describe them as any one thing. They won't say,
Mm.
"Well, I run an IT company or I run a marketing company." Once they run a number of businesses, they're actually forced. You can't say, "Well, I run 3 businesses. I own a business." You own
Yeah.
businesses. What do you call yourself? And so
Mm.
actually, if you look ahead, and I speak about finding people who are a bit further ahead, they don't view themselves as, "Well, I'm this one business." They see themselves differently. But if you do only have one business and that's your focus, then yeah, that becomes your identity.
Yeah.
Okay, and I own an IT company. I run an IT business, but actually, you're a business owner. But that's probably not your first role. Maybe you're a dad, a brother, an uncle, an auntie, a mum, a sister. You have other roles in life. The question is, how do you give meaning to those other roles? So, and what happens if that role is taken off you? So if you could no longer say, I'm a business owner or, of a marketing firm or an IT company,
Mm.
are you then just a shareholder? Are you then just a business owner? Or do you call yourself an entrepreneur? For some reason in America, and I visit America a few times a year lately after a long break. And that was something that struck me is that was natural for them, but in Australia, not so much.
Mm-mm. I've
They
also
tend to shy
noticed.
away from that.
Mm.
So I would say identity is forced on us. We just adopt it. But I
Mm.
think you need to be deliberate about it to say, well, if your identity is in a thing and that thing goes away, what then? And a
Food for
curious,
thought.
yeah, a curious thing, talk to those who have retired, because the number one question they get is, what do you do? And they go, I'm retired. And it's like, but actually they're probably not. They're probably doing a ton of things.
Yeah,
But
probably.
retirement is the way that we talk about it. But yeah, I think there's nuance there. And I think me included, have a lot of work to do on identity to
Mm.
say, who are you? Why are you here? What difference do you want to make? Steve Jobs was famous for saying he just wanted to make a dent in the world. Uh,
Yes.
for me, I think about that and go, well, I don't necessarily want to make a dent in the world, but I do want to make a difference to my family. And starting with your kind of soul system of your friends, your family. What does that mean to you? And then for others, because most of us, that's the thing that will be remembered by is those stories that I spoke about are those that you interact with.
I think something I found very beneficial for myself, I've been focusing on developing my personal brand. And just hearing you speak about it now, it's actually created a bit of separation, which is good between Design Studio Perth, between the podcast and my jewelry business. Because in the beginning, I was very much, embedded with the Design Studio Perth. But having built this personal brand, Tracy Fryer side of things, it's really helped me kind of, I think, trust my team more. Kind of not that I'm letting go, but it makes, delegating a lot easier because I'm not so fixated on just one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's good. I
Mm.
mean, because you're not any one of those things, but you are all of those things. It sounds a bit
Yes.
kind of convoluted, but I would look at, I think we have great case studies. I mean, look at Elon Musk. Like how many businesses does he run? But he's not any one of those things.
Yeah,
But
Tony
in
Robbins as
Australia,
well.
yeah, I mean, in Australia, there's
So
plenty of
many.
people that are like a netball coach. They're like they volunteer somewhere for kids, and they'll do
Mm.
something else. And like, which one of those things are they? And I would say that those are just activities. They're not necessarily represent who they are. And so I think your character, like what you aim to do, what you do, is different than who you are. And I mean, I'm not the person to talk to if you wanted to go deep into that. I'm sure there's some psychology experts that
Fair
would
enough.
help you. Yeah, that would go into that scenario. It's beyond my pay grade, but yeah, I do think about like each level in business forces you to adopt a new identity. Because I'll give you
Mm.
an example. When do you change from calling yourself a small business owner to a medium business owner to a big business owner?
Yeah,
Or do you
true.
just always refer to yourself as a business owner?
Mm.
And it's like really subtle, but it has power in it and what it means for people and what they hold on to. Because maybe they need to let go. Maybe they need
Yes.
to let go of saying they're a small business owner. Uh, you know,
Yes. And so, and I think not only are you making a dent in your family, you've also stepped up and you are facilitating the leaders' alumni sessions as well, which has been great to see. What makes you take on roles like that?
like I said, I worked out again. I didn't design it. I fell into it, and
Mm.
then I had someone ask me to facilitate a kind of a business IT peer group, like way back in I don't know 2010, and I was very very fortunate that that guy was like, "Hey, can you just run this?" And then it kind of I would say the dominoes fell, and so that peer group was a very kind of pivotal moment just for me to get out of myself and go, oh, how can I actually help others solve their problems, but not through advice, only through questions.
Mm.
And so I found that invigorating. It's incredibly draining. Nothing like being in a technology business, but because you're kind of forcing other business owners to
Mm.
question their thinking, their thoughts,
Mm.
and it's a lot of fun to see people uncover new perspectives because I enjoy it. And like if
Yeah.
I'm just scratching my own itch, I'm curious. I love uncovering random things. My kids say I'm like Trivial Pursuit dad with random facts that don't help them in life. But
Nice.
yeah, like so you got to
Interesting.
find, yeah, you go, oh,
Mm.
that's to know, and then but though that facilitation has meant a lot to me and it's helped me with relationships, but it's helped me in my own business. It's helped me personally, helped me in
Mm.
volunteer roles. So what I've worked out is like I get a lot of fulfillment out of doing that because you can help people uncover things that they may not have known about themselves or their own business. And oftentimes we're only like one stone that we need to unturn to kind of
Yeah.
make that next breakthrough. It's not often like huge move. It's small
Mm-mm.
things. And I find like people underestimate the power of peers. They underestimate the power of those that
They
they
do.
journeying with, even if,
Mm.
and I find like, yep, I've been in peer groups with business owners, been in business groups with others that aren't in the same industry. Both are equally beneficial. I mean, obviously, I think if it is your industry, there's a higher level of insight and awareness, but you can still benefit from that. And sometimes what you find is external perspective on your own business that's not doesn't carry the baggage of your industry
Mm.
can give you a lot of breakthroughs. So yeah, that
Definitely.
facilitation in WA leaders in Evolve in their peer group program when I was doing that for years, those things were really good. And then like when you're volunteering on a board, so going back to my kids' school board, the goal of a chair when you're in that role is not to be the one that talks the most. Your goal is to
Yes.
facilitate questions, to ask, to get people to consider different points of view, to challenge. And so facilitation is a lot like that. You can provide that impact for people that maybe they didn't expect. And many of us, we don't starve. We don't starve for knowledge. We don't starve for data. The thing
Mm.
we starve for is wisdom. You know,
Yes.
and that's the piece that I think we get starved for. And I think questions open that up for all of us, and you kind of and it could come from anywhere. So sometimes that's the piece that I find is like you could stand back and just ask a question, and then the next person who adds on to that question or adds on to that perspective provides the breakthrough. So
Mm.
questions are viral in that sense. They kind of unlock parts of the brain in business that we probably need to access a bit more.
Yeah, and definitely just through those conversations as well. You might have different conversations with different people, and then there'll be one person that just says one thing, and suddenly you just have this like breakthrough,
Yeah.
which is great. But if you just, if I just sat at my desk and didn't go out or didn't network or anything like that, I'd miss out on all of that.
Yeah. I mean, a good question to
Mhm.
ask people is when was the last time you experienced a breakthrough in how you thought about your business?
Mm.
And what the opposite question for that when people are struggling is, what's the breakthrough you need next in your business?
Yeah.
And like a lot of people are challenged in an area, and it's like, hey, so what is the breakthrough that you need next in your business? And a
Mm.
lot of us default answer to clients, right? But that's an end result,
Mm.
and so it's like, maybe it's capacity, like I don't have time and I can't do everything myself. So it's like, what's your next breakthrough? Like, what's the breakthrough you need? And
Yeah.
it is to kind of push on that and keep asking, like, why is that the problem? Why is that the issue? Why
Mm.
why does that keep happening? Why does that come up again? And oftentimes those lead back to us, and that gets uncomfortable and we don't want to
Yeah.
change. That's
No.
really not, no. So,
I was just
but
gonna
that's the
say,
real thing.
yeah. I was just gonna say sometimes we actually have to look at ourselves and say, "Well, am I actually causing the issue right now?" And, what in my personal growth journey do I need to what block do I need to get rid of so I can kind of progress forward as well?
Yeah, like I find I'm looking in the mirror and I'm my worst enemy and my biggest roadblock,
Me
and
too. Mm.
so from that perspective, it's like, how do you find people to kind of provide a bit of a challenge or a bit of an insight, or like, how do you give people like permission to give you different perspective, whether that's an advisor, a coach, a mentor, a guide,
Yeah.
or maybe it's just the catch up conversation where you can say something and someone can share something different. But I find
Mm.
those, I find it's an echo chamber if you do it yourself,
Mm.
and
Definitely.
it's best done with someone else. And ideally, you want a third party, because if they've got like skin in the game, i.e., if they're part of the problem, then that's really hard to kind of unpick, because they've got an incentive to solve it, or bias, if you like. So I
Yeah.
think that's, peers can provide that, advisors can provide that, and I think in business you can provide that to customers. Like,
Mm.
you think about how many customers, when you talk to about marketing, Tracy, you get to challenge their perspective. You know,
Totally. Yeah. And sometimes they're so like fixed or closed on an idea. And I'm like, you do not realize how much greatness you have within you and your business. We need to get that out there. So, and actually, it's quite a challenge sometimes. But I guess it's just taking them on that journey to really realize, like, how they can better service their clients, how they can better leverage off their brand as well. If they don't have a brand, why not? So, really just guiding them. Because again, if they're so close to an idea, you have to be so careful how you actually approach it.
yeah, yeah, and many people hold an opinion or an idea or a concept sacrosanct, and it's
Yeah.
kind of like, it's no one wants to tell someone their baby is ugly, and no one wants to tell a
No.
business owner. And especially if you got staff, like, people don't want to tell you, like, I remember those struggles, and we've had scenarios when I think we've had or made the wrong decision, and staff have in varying ways tried to tell us, and we just haven't been attuned to it.
Mm.
And then someone else has told us external, and we've listened, but actually staff probably knew that 6 months before we did. So,
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a benefit in having some kind of external input.
Yeah, 100%. With my team as well, I always create those opportunities to give me feedback because I'm still learning. I do not know everything. And I find from doing that, it's actually helped me grow so much. Obviously, you take it on board in the right space, don't get your back up. But just really creating those opportunities to give me that feedback as well has been really, really great for my personal growth.
Yeah, I mean, we look at like culture or engagement, but one of my favorite things is, like, people will message, or we use a tool which many people do for like measuring staff engagement. And
Mm.
the great thing about that in your business is you get to hear from staff. The question to ask yourself is, like, who's assessing your own leadership?
Mm.
So, I mean, you can assess your culture in your business and like the way you do things and how you operate, and those areas. But when do you get your leadership assessed? Like,
Yeah.
when do you actually review how you're performing? And again, great question is, would your company would your company enthusiastically rehire you as CEO?
Yeah, that's a great question.
So, and the question sometimes, the reason that's relevant is because we're not all, and me included, there's plenty of times when it's like, okay, that part of my role, I definitely wouldn't hire myself for. I'm not actually the best
Mm.
person to do it. And,
Yeah, same.
and that may stay for a period of time, but ultimately you want to get yourself out of it. Occasionally, it's actually the whole role. And I've seen owners where they've been an amazing owner, the business founder, and they've done a huge amount of work in there, but they've got a completely different person to be a CEO. And
Mm.
that's intentional. And, we've got some clients that are going on that journey at the moment, family businesses that have done it. And it's a really, I think, studious thing to do for their business that benefits them
Mm.
long term.
Yeah, definitely. And so, as I mentioned, 20 years of business, which I think is absolutely incredible. Congratulations. I'd love to know two things you're most proud of yourself and your business partner that you guys have achieved in that time.
I think coming back to the North Star, one of the goals that we
Mm.
had for the business was that the business could run without us. And, that was kind of part one. And so for years, we still have a business, I think, that most people would consider as kind of reliable and has a foundational focus on serving customers, but that hasn't required either of us to be like operational. Like I have to
Mm.
do a quote, or I have to fix a computer, or I have to install something. Like we haven't had to do that for years. And so that's been about building a team and building people. And we've had amazing people, made amazing people mistakes as well, and continue to do that. But yeah, like, so we do both
Well,
of those, but we've
yeah.
managed to I think we've managed to get out of the weeds of having to deliver, and delivery was one of those things that we wanted to kind of, get away from. And I think
Mm.
that the second part of that journey is, and this started kind of 2 years ago, the executive team, the managers that we had, they were able to say to us, "Hey, for your plan, Lee, we think, you can, elevate yourself to be on the board." And so
Mm.
that for us was a big step, and the first part of our compass. Naively, we thought we could both do it at the same time, but it didn't end up like that. So this will be his second year of just being on the board full time. So
Yeah.
for a small business, of our size, that's a big achievement, and it
Mm.
changes the dynamic of how you run an organization, because you're trying to think about governance, you're trying to think about like how do execs understand the machinations of business, and
Mm.
there's still a lot of
At the
work to be
level.
done. Yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done, but that's been a really big journey where if we look at 20 years and saying, well, actually, we've been able to achieve kind of 50% of that North Star that we set kind of
Yeah.
in 12 years ago. And that's a big thing. Now, everything changes. For the
Mm.
moment, for us, that was something that I'd say has been really significant and impactful, because whether that's him being on the board, or really like, when my wife had a big birthday celebration and we kind of went away for 3 weeks to New Zealand
Oh,
and
great.
drove around.
Yeah.
And again, I was able to turn off my email, turn off my Teams, and
Oh,
have
awesome.
zero requirements to do that. And so I'm thankful and grateful for the team and what
Mm.
they've done, because that's been kind of Lego bricks over time that everyone's contributed to. And that's
Yes.
kind of something that we have internally is we talk about like, how does our team go home knowing they're green every day? And sometimes it's not,
Mm.
it's red. But,
Yeah.
but part of that is how can they go away and like, we're in IT, we talk about backups, but how can they go away and not have to come back to a mountain load of work? And
Mm.
so that's kind of like this constant effort of being able to give your team the same ability where they can have a holiday and not stress that they have to get called on their holiday. And that's not always achievable for people in different
Yeah.
roles and sides of the business. I
Mhm.
get that. But I would say that's been massive for us, is being able to do that, those kind of things. And I would say the third thing for me, Tracy, is being able to give back. Like
Yes.
there's plenty of relationships I have in IT industry and business, and I've been able to give back, either if it's through facilitation or questions or just a coffee. And like,
Mm.
so many have done that for me, being able to do that and have the time to do it, because it does require time. That's been really fulfilling, because I think, again, that's another story that people can share and remember, and some blood knows that you can talk about, or some mistake that you made
Yes.
that people can learn from. And so, yeah, I'm really grateful for those three things.
And so on that note, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see business owners face when it comes to their IT?
I think technology kind of aligns well to the same problem we were talking at the moment, like begin with the end in mind. And
Mm.
plenty of people think about technology in terms of zeros and ones, bits and bytes, hardware and software, but you need to start with a plan. You wouldn't build a house without a plan. Why
No.
do you build technology without a plan? And it was something that
Mm.
we kind of went on a journey of, is that technology changes so frequently, so often, as does business. But if you don't have a plan, you end up ultimately with a shopping list.
Mm.
And it may not be the right shopping list. It may not be the right hardware or software or all those kind of things, but they're less important nowadays because it's about your people, your data, security risk, all the different things we talk about. But that's like kind of saying to people, oh, your taps are important, your chairs are important, your curtains are
Mm.
important. Like it's a bunch of ingredients without a recipe. And
Yeah.
so our philosophy as a business is like start with a plan, like understand where you're going as a business and align your technology to that plan. Because technology should be, and it's corny and cliche, but technology should be an enabler.
Yeah.
But you can't enable what you're not planning for. Like it's like that's just fundamental. Like people talk about it and go, "Oh, I've got all this great technology." I mean, I spoke to a client the other day, and they're like, "Oh, our technology's sorted." I was like, "Oh, okay. What areas?" And they're like, they
Yeah.
listed off some areas which were sorted. But then I asked them about like all of the things that they hadn't thought about that were in other areas of their business. Like some were sales,
Mm.
some were reporting, some were work in progress, some were privacy, security risk, and business continuity. And they're like, "Oh, we haven't really thought about that." Because they were just thinking about it. Well, we've got this few bits of software and we're going great.
Mm.
And again, it's like saying I've got some windows, therefore, and they all great windows, and I've got some doors and they work. I've got a house.
Mm.
It's like they're growing, like they've doubled in size, and the
Wow.
house they had for where they were is no longer the right house for where they're going. So
Mm.
that plan has to change. And like I said, if you know where you're wanting to end up, that becomes important. So I would say that's a major challenge I think most businesses get wrong. And like, I don't blame them because
Yeah.
technology is a new industry. Like 1994, we had the internet commercialized.
Yeah.
So we're like 25 years. IT as a young adult
It is.
still probably has some pimples. And,
Yeah.
and like that's the technology industry. And there's no regulation.
No.
There's some requirements, but people can do, and there's amazing IT companies all around Perth, and everyone's got a different viewpoint. But we are doing it from our own perspective. If you want to be an accountant, you've got to be a CPA or a CA. If you want to be a lawyer, you've got to go and do kind of do
Mm.
your legal practice and degree. But your doctor, same thing. If you want to be a plumber, you've got to be certified. Even to be a
Definitely.
plumber in WA, you've got to be certified. IT, no
Mm.
requirement. So I think we all expect that will change. But I've been saying that for 10 years and it hasn't changed, Tracy. So either I'm getting my news from the wrong location or this is going to be a very long bet. But, maybe that's related because technology shifts and,
Yeah.
the conversations we had about planning technology 10 years ago, completely different to the
Mhm.
planning today. So, yeah, I would say the biggest challenge I see with businesses is not planning. And then related to that at the moment is what are the current things most businesses aren't planning adequately for?
Mm.
Number one, cybersecurity. Number two, artificial intelligence. Number three, third thing that I see businesses not planning for is change. And like
Yeah.
when I say change is like things breaking, plans breaking, security. We've just seen a huge outage
Mhm.
worldwide around
Yeah, and it
technology.
happens.
Yeah, and it happens. So it's going to happen. And so people aren't prepared. So your plan needs to include something when things don't go right.
Mm.
And, that's a big list for people. So, but I would say those are kind of that. Number one is planning. And number three, within the three things within those planning is cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and what happens when things go wrong, because they will. So,
Yeah,
what do they do?
inevitably. Yeah. And Zon, if you could go back, what would you tell yourself, 20 years ago, Zon, what would be the biggest piece of advice that you would give him?
I think the biggest lesson recently, and I think if I consider this question, I change every few years based on new blood noses. So
Yeah.
new
You and me
things,
both.
yeah, like I wish I'd gone back. I would say, and this is a recent one, Tracy, which has kind of opened up an old wound, I would say, that I've
Mm.
learned is I spent a lot of time in the early years with Lee, both of us. We spent a lot of time investing in ourselves, which is kind of pretty common. Like a lot of people do that. And so
Yeah.
we went to a lot of conferences, we went to a lot of business events. The curious kind of experience is we did that a lot of times on our own, sometimes with our team. But recently, what I've seen is exposing your team to external events and training. We should have done a lot more, a lot earlier, a lot more often.
Mm.
So we were the primary recipients of some information, and I think where that change we could have done differently would have been to give our team way more opportunities to experience that for themselves. Because, you can invest in staff with online training and online learning, but actually industry experience, like going to different events, being part of an event or a peer group or a learning group or something else, like how do you craft that exposure where others can ask questions of them and their
Yeah.
management or their leadership or their professionalism? And so, yes, you can do that as an owner, but it's the common thing. Like your brother tells you something, you don't listen. Some stranger tells you, suddenly it's gospel, and you're like, oh, but your brother goes, I've been saying that to you for like this many years. So
So
business
true.
partners, yeah, business partners have that as well. Like Lee will say something, and I'll be like, oh yeah, yeah, and then next minute someone else will say like, oh, did you know? I'm like, I said that before. So
Yes.
I think so. Creating that, going back, I would tell myself like, how am I creating those opportunities and moments for the staff? Because that
Mhm.
exposure, and it's often like that exposure to the industry and events and those scenarios, the reward is unrecognizable because
Mhm.
you can't watch a YouTube to get that experience. You have to be there.
No.
So I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, I would say that's been a big learning. If I was to go back and say, hey, stop going to everything yourself, look at who
Yes.
else you get to start to lead that journey and be on that journey with you.
And Zaun, thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. To have your 20 years of experience shared in this conversation is absolute privilege. So thank you so much. I'd love to
That's
know,
okay.
where's the best place for our listeners to go should they wish to connect with you?
Like most IT people, we love LinkedIn. So, and if you're searching, there's not that many Zorns on LinkedIn. So
No,
yeah,
it's not. I had a
typically
look.
that's the best thing to find with me and connect with me on LinkedIn and yeah, start that journey from there.
Great. So we'll be sure to pop all the links in the show notes as well. Zaun, thank you so much for your time today. Most appreciated, and hope to chat with you again soon.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thanks.